Shaking, she fled her father's land until one rancher found her and held her close. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when she woke, her body still trembling. Every small sound from the old wooden house made her heart race. The creaking floorboards, the wind against the windows, the low moan of the barn in the distance. It all felt threatening, as if the world itself were reminding her that she did not belong here. She had spent all her life on her father's land, a vast stretch of open fields, thick woods, and dusty roads, but it had never felt like a home. It had always felt like a trap. She lay there for a few moments, listening to the quiet. Her father's voice still echoed in her mind, sharp and commanding, full of words that could cut through anyone's confidence. He had rules for everything, rules that never seemed to make sense, and punishments that never seemed fair. She remembered the nights when she had stayed awake, hiding under her blanket, imagining herself somewhere far away where no one could tell her what to do, somewhere she could breathe freely, somewhere she could be herself. Today, the thought of leaving had settled into her mind like a seed that had been waiting for years to grow. She could no longer stay here, not another day, not another hour. Her hands shook as she slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound. The sun had started to rise, casting a golden light over the fields, but even that beauty felt distant and cold. She pulled on the old coat she had kept hidden in the corner, a coat that smelled faintly of mothballs and dust, and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders. She tiptoed past the kitchen, where the faint smell of last night's supper still lingered. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and she felt a pang of guilt. She loved her mother in her own way, but she hadn't seen her mother in years. Her mother had left when she was a child, unable to stay in a place where fear ruled every corner. Her father had always blamed her for her mother's departure, making her feel small and unworthy. That feeling had grown inside her over the years, a constant reminder that she was trapped, that she needed to escape. She stepped outside, the cold morning air biting at her cheeks. The land stretched endlessly, fields of brown and green, dotted with barns and fences, and the distant mountains painted the horizon. She paused for a moment, taking it all in. This land had been her entire world, but it was no longer hers. It was a cage disguised as freedom. She inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill her lungs, and then began to walk. Her plan was simple, but terrifying. She would leave before her father even noticed she was gone. She had packed a small bag the night before, careful to take only what she could carry, a few changes of clothes, some food, a water bottle, and a small notebook where she had written her thoughts and dreams. Everything else, everything that tied her to this life, would stay behind. It felt strange to leave so much behind, but she knew it was necessary. There could be no looking back. The first few steps away from the house were the hardest. She felt like the wind itself was trying to push her back, like every familiar tree and fence was calling her name, begging her to stay. Her heart pounded in her chest as she moved faster, almost running now, her feet kicking up dust from the dirt road. The world beyond the land was unknown, frightening and exhilarating all at once. She didn't know where she would go, who she would meet, or what dangers awaited her, but anything was better than staying where fear ruled her every moment. She walked through the fields, her eyes scanning the horizon. The early morning light made everything look soft and calm, but she knew the calm was deceptive. The land she was leaving behind had been harsh in its own way. Every corner of the property reminded her of limits, rules, and punishments. The barn where she had once tried to hide from her father's anger, the fence where he had made her stand for hours as a lesson. Every place carried memories of fear. She pressed forward, determined not to let the memories pull her back. As the day grew brighter, she found herself at the edge of the woods. The trees were thick and dense, their branches tangled like a protective wall. She stepped into the shadows, feeling safer under the canopy. The air smelled of earth and leaves, a scent that was foreign yet comforting. She had walked this way before when she wanted to hide, but this time was different. She wasn't hiding. She was escaping. Each step into the forest was a step toward freedom, toward a life she could choose for herself. Hours passed, and her legs grew tired. The sun climbed high in the sky, turning the path into a mixture of light and shadow. She stopped by a small stream, kneeling to drink and splash cool water on her face. The sound of flowing water was soothing, like a gentle song of hope. She took a moment to rest, letting herself feel the relief of being away from the house, away from the anger, away from the constant tension that had filled her life. But even as she rested, fear lingered. She knew the land she had left behind would not easily let her go. Her father might search for her, call neighbors, or even try to track her down himself. The thought made her stomach churn, but she forced herself to push it aside. She had made this decision, and now she had to see it through. There could be no turning back. She thought about the life she wanted, the life she had dreamed of for so long. She imagined waking up without fear, walking outside without trembling, speaking her mind without worrying about punishment. She imagined a place where she could belong, where she could feel safe, and where the world didn't seem so harsh. The thought of that life filled her with a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. It seemed so far away, but the thought of not trying at all was unbearable. As evening approached, she found a small clearing and decided to rest for the night. She gathered dry leaves and branches, creating a small nest where she could lie down. The sky above was painted with shades of pink and orange, and for a moment she allowed herself to marvel at the beauty. She realized that this world was bigger than her fear, bigger than the land she had left behind. It was vast, full of possibilities, and waiting for her to explore. Night fell, and with it came new challenges. The forest was alive with sounds she had never noticed before. The rustle of animals, the whisper of the wind, the distant call of owls. At first every sound made her jump, her heart beating wildly, but gradually she learned to listen without panic. She realized that fear did not have to control her, that she could exist in this world without being consumed by it. The realization was small, but it was powerful. As she drifted off to sleep, wrapped in her coat and clutching her small bag, she felt a spark of something she had not felt in years. Freedom. She did not know what the next day would bring, who she might meet, or what dangers might lie ahead, but for the first time in her life she felt that she had a choice. And that choice, that small flicker of independence, was enough to keep her moving forward. She dreamed of open roads, of new faces, of laughter without fear. She dreamed of a life where she could make her own decisions, where her past did not define her, and where she could finally belong somewhere. The night was long, but it was hers, and when the morning came, she would rise again, determined to continue her journey, one step at a time. For the first time, she felt that her story was hers to write, and no one, not even her father or the land she had fled, could take that away. The morning light filtered through the trees, soft and golden, but she barely noticed it. Her mind was heavy with the reality of what lay ahead. She had fled her father's land, leaving behind everything she had ever known, and now she faced the unknown. The forest around her was vast, and every step she took seemed to echo in the quiet air. Birds sang, leaves rustled, and somewhere in the distance a brook babbled, but none of it comforted her. She felt small, alone, and fragile, like a bird lost in a storm. She rose from the small nest she had made the night before, brushing leaves from her coat. Her legs were stiff, her body sore, but she forced herself to move. She had to keep going. There was no turning back now. She followed a narrow trail that led deeper into the forest, her eyes scanning for any sign of danger. Every shadow seemed to shift with intent. Every branch looked like it could trip her. Every rustle made her heart jump. She had learned fear on her father's land, and it followed her like a shadow, refusing to leave. Hours passed as she walked through the trees, her mind wandering between memories of home and dreams of freedom. She remembered the long days on the farm, the chores she had been forced to do, the words her father had thrown at her. His anger had been constant, like a storm that never passed. She thought of the nights she had cried quietly, hiding her tears under her pillow, wishing for a life where she could breathe. Now walking alone in the forest, she wondered if that life was real or just a dream she had made up to survive. Hunger soon reminded her of the practical side of survival. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small pieces of bread she had packed. They were dry and hard, but they would keep her going. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying not to think about how long it might be before she could find more food. She sipped water from her bottle, the cool liquid refreshing her dry throat. Even though she was alone, even though the forest seemed endless and unwelcoming, she felt a tiny spark of hope. She was surviving. She was still moving forward. As the day wore on, she realized that finding shelter would be harder than she thought. The forest was dense, and sunlight barely touched the ground. She needed a place to rest that was safe, hidden from wandering animals and any people who might not be friendly. She spotted a small clearing with a fallen tree trunk and decided to use it as a temporary refuge. She arranged leaves and soft moss to lie on, creating a small bed for herself. It was uncomfortable, but it was better than the hard ground. The forest, however, was not as quiet as she had hoped. Every sound made her jump, every shadow made her stop. A deer dashed through the underbrush, startling her. A bird swooped low, sending a chill down her spine. Even the wind, which usually felt peaceful, seemed threatening. She realized that being alone in the wild meant facing these fears without anyone to help her. There was no one to calm her down, no one to tell her that everything would be okay. She had to find that strength inside herself. As evening approached, The forest grew darker, the shadows lengthening with the setting sun. She decided she could not stay in the clearing. It was too exposed. She needed more protection, something that could hide her from view. She stumbled upon a cluster of thick bushes and fallen trees forming a small hollow. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it felt safer. She crawled inside, wrapping herself in her coat and holding her bag close. She whispered quietly to herself, telling herself that she could do this, that she was stronger than she thought. Sleep was difficult to find. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, the snap of twigs, the distant hoot of an owl. She stayed alert, listening, waiting, ready to react to any danger. Her mind wandered to her father, imagining him searching for her, yelling her name, calling for neighbors. She shivered at the thought, but forced herself to focus on the present. She had escaped once. She could survive this night. The next morning, she woke to the smell of wet earth and the sound of birds chirping. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft light through the trees. She felt tired, her body sore, but she also felt a strange sense of accomplishment. She had made it through the first night alone, and that was no small thing. She knew there would be more nights like this, but she also knew that each day she survived, she grew stronger. She continued her journey, moving cautiously through the forest. She kept her eyes on the path ahead, her ears alert for any sound. She found a small stream and drank deeply, feeling the cool water soothe her parched throat. She splashed water on her face, letting the cold liquid wake her up and wash away some of the fear. She looked around and noticed the beauty of the forest, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the delicate flowers growing near the stream, the gentle slope of the land. For a moment, she allowed herself to appreciate it, even though fear still lingered. She had eaten all the bread she had packed, and she had no idea where she could find more. She spotted some wild berries growing near the stream and carefully picked a few, remembering stories her mother had told her about which ones were safe to eat. They were sweet and refreshing, a small comfort in the midst of uncertainty. She learned quickly that surviving alone required caution, observation, and patience. Every choice mattered. Every decision could make a difference. By midday, she felt the first real pangs of loneliness. She had been alone for so long, moving through the forest without speaking to anyone, and it began to weigh on her spirit. She missed simple things, the sound of a friendly voice, the comfort of someone understanding her, the warmth of human presence. But she pushed the thoughts aside, reminding herself that this journey was necessary. She had left her father's land to find freedom, and she could not let loneliness turn into fear. As she walked, she noticed signs of other people, a worn trail in the dirt, the remnants of a small campfire, footprints leading into the trees. She approached carefully, aware that strangers could be dangerous. She reminded herself to stay alert, to observe first, and to trust her instincts. The forest was full of unknowns, and she had learned that caution could be the difference between safety and harm. The afternoon passed slowly. She found a few small streams and stopped to rest, her back against a tree. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself breathe, and felt a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. Each step she took was a step toward freedom, a step away from fear. She realized that survival was not just about escaping her father. It was about learning to trust herself, to rely on her instincts, and to find courage she had never known she had. As evening came again, she sought shelter. She found a shallow cave in the side of a hill, hidden from the trail, and decided to stay there for the night. Inside, it was cool and quiet, and she felt a small sense of relief. She gathered leaves and moss to make her bed, and as she lay down, she whispered to herself that she was doing well, that she was strong, that she could survive. She felt the weight of the day settle on her shoulders, but also a growing sense of pride in herself for facing the unknown. Night in the forest was different from night on her father's land. There were no walls to keep her safe, no familiar corners, no predictable sounds. Every noise made her jump, but she also learned to listen, to understand the patterns of the forest, to find comfort in the rhythm of life around her. She realized that fear could be managed, that it could be acknowledged without allowing it to control her. Each night she spent alone, she grew more aware, more capable, more confident. She drifted to sleep, exhausted but determined. The forest was quiet, the stars above twinkling like tiny lights in a vast sky. She felt a small spark of hope, a belief that she could make it through this journey. She had left behind everything familiar, and the path ahead was unknown and full of challenges, but she also knew that she had taken the first step toward freedom. That first step, she realized, was the hardest but also the most important. The days that followed were filled with small victories and constant learning. She discovered which berries were safe to eat, how to find water, and how to navigate using the sun. She learned to move quietly, to avoid drawing attention to herself, and to find shelter when the sun grew too hot or the nights too cold. Each day tested her courage and resolve, but it also strengthened her spirit. She realized that the wilderness, while harsh, also offered lessons in growth that she could not have experienced on her father's land. By the end of the week, she had traveled miles from the place she had once called home. The fear of being found still lingered, but it was no longer paralyzing. She had learned to listen to her instincts, to observe her surroundings, and to trust herself. She had learned that being alone did not mean being helpless, and for the first time in her life she began to imagine a future where she could be free, safe, and her own person. She had been walking for hours when she first saw him. The forest had opened into a small clearing, sunlight spilling onto a narrow dirt road. At first she thought she imagined him, a tall figure, moving slowly, almost blending into the landscape, his hands steady as he checked the ground or adjusted a tool. He was calm, strong, and confident in a way she had never seen before. She froze behind a bush, heart pounding, unsure whether he was a threat or something else entirely. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to hide, to disappear. After days of being alone, she had learned that people could be unpredictable, and not everyone could be trusted. Her father's shadow still haunted her. She remembered the sharp anger in his voice, the fear he had instilled in her from a young age. Yet, something about this man made her hesitate. There was no harshness in him, no aggression. He seemed gentle, deliberate, and careful. And in that moment, curiosity mixed with caution in her chest. She watched him from a distance. He was tending to something near the edge of the road, a small fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree branch. He worked slowly, methodically, checking each plank, making sure nothing would fall. The rhythm of his movements was calming in a strange way, a contrast to the constant fear she had lived with. She found herself taking a step forward, then quickly retreating behind the bush, unsure why she wanted to approach. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, and the warmth made her shiver less than she had in days. She noticed the small details of the man's work, the way he paused to examine the fence, the way he wiped sweat from his brow, the careful precision of each movement. It was clear he was experienced, someone who had lived and worked on this land for a long time. He seemed in harmony with his surroundings, aware of everything around him, yet unafraid. Yeah. She felt a pang of longing, wishing she could feel that same sense of confidence and safety. When he finally looked up, his eyes scanned the road, and for a moment she thought he might see her. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she ducked lower, holding her breath. But he didn't see her. He continued his work, humming softly, unaware that someone was watching him. She realized then that she was curious, more curious than she had been in a long time. She had been running from fear for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to observe calmly, to be interested in something other than survival. As the afternoon passed, she noticed a small pile of tools beside him and a wagon nearby filled with hay. The place seemed safe, orderly, and alive with quiet purpose. The rancher worked steadily, never rushing, never showing frustration, and she began to admire the patience and skill in his hands. She thought of her own life, of the chaos and fear she had fled. Here was someone who had mastered his world, someone who could live without constant fear, someone who could offer safety simply by being himself. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since early morning. She realized she couldn't stay hidden forever, that she needed to make a decision. Should she try to approach him, risk revealing herself, or continue moving along the road, hoping for shelter somewhere else? Her fear of people warred with her need for help. Hunger, fatigue, and the ache of loneliness pressed on her. She made a choice. She would wait a little longer, observe more, and try to understand if he could be trusted. As evening approached, the rancher began to pack up his tools. He seemed ready to leave for the day, and she realized that she might lose this chance. She wanted to approach him, but felt paralyzed by fear. Her father's voice rang in her head, warning her about strangers, warning her that no one could be trusted. But she also felt something else, a small, fragile hope that perhaps this man could be different. Perhaps he could offer safety without expectation. Perhaps he could show her that not all people were cruel. She waited until he moved closer to the barn, then took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the bush. Her legs shook, and her heart pounded so loudly she thought he would hear it. She called out softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Excuse me." He turned toward her, his eyes gentle but alert. "Hello," he said. His voice was calm, steady, and kind, unlike any voice she had heard in years. There was no harshness, no judgment, just attention. She felt a flicker of relief but also a wave of anxiety. She didn't know how to explain herself, didn't know how much to reveal, didn't know if she could trust him with the truth. I don't mean to bother you," she said, her voice quivering. I don't have anywhere to go." The words spilled out awkwardly, but they were honest. The man listened quietly, nodding slowly. He didn't interrupt, didn't question, didn't make her feel small. He simply looked at her, as if he understood, as if her fear and exhaustion were enough to explain everything. He took a step closer but kept a respectful distance. "You look tired," he said softly. "Are you okay?" She shook her head. Her voice caught in her throat, but she managed to whisper, I've been walking. I don't have anywhere safe." The rancher's eyes softened. "Come with me," he said gently. "There's a place nearby where you can rest. You'll be safe there. I promise." Her heart leapt, but fear still clung to her. She had been hurt before, betrayed before, and the idea of trusting someone new felt impossible. Yet, something about the calm in his eyes, the kindness in his tone, made her take a tentative step forward. He led her to a small cabin near the edge of his property. It was simple but warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth and a smell of baked bread and fresh hay in the air. She felt a strange sense of wonder, something so ordinary yet so comforting. She hadn't seen comfort like this in years. Her body trembled as she stepped inside, unsure if she was allowed to feel relief, unsure if it was safe to let her guard down. "Sit by the fire," he said, pointing to a chair. "You must be cold and hungry. There's some food here for you." She hesitated, then slowly made her way to the fire, feeling the warmth seep into her chilled bones. She sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, afraid that if she relaxed too much the world might take it away. He returned with a plate of food, simple but nourishing, bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. She stared at it, almost unable to believe that someone could offer such kindness without asking for anything in return. "Eat," he said. "You need strength. There's no rush. No one will harm you here." She took a small bite, then another, feeling energy return to her tired body. She had been alone for so long that she had almost forgotten what it was like to be cared for, to be safe, to be welcomed. As she ate, he watched quietly, giving her space but also offering a sense of presence. She realized that she could breathe again, that she could relax without fear pressing on her chest. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she allowed herself a small smile. She didn't have to explain everything, didn't have to reveal her past all at once. For now, she could simply exist in this space of safety. Hours passed as they spoke quietly. He didn't pry, didn't demand, didn't judge. He asked simple questions about her journey, her needs, and listened attentively. She began to feel a strange sense of trust forming, fragile but undeniable. She realized that this man, the rancher, was different. He offered not only physical safety but also emotional space, something she had almost given up on ever finding. As night fell, he showed her a small room with a simple bed. "You can sleep here," he said. "Rest. Tomorrow is a new day." She nodded, her body trembling, her mind still alert but slowly letting go of some of its tension. For the first time in a long time, she felt the possibility of safety, of care, of a life where fear did not rule every moment. As she lay down, she realized that meeting him had changed something inside her. She had fled her father's land with only hope guiding her, and now she had found someone who offered a spark of that hope made real. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she would ever fully trust again, but she knew this. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, heard, and held, even if only by the promise of safety this stranger had given her. And in that quiet cabin, with the fire crackling and the night wrapping around the small house, she finally allowed herself to rest. She was not alone anymore. The next morning she woke to a quiet, gentle light spilling through the cabin window. For the first time in weeks she felt rested. The weight that had pressed on her chest since the day she fled her father's land seemed a little lighter. She stretched slowly, savoring the warmth of the cabin and the soft mattress beneath her. She could hear the faint sound of the rancher moving outside, tending to the animals in the land, as he had done for as long as she could see. There was a calm rhythm to his work, a steadiness that made the world feel less threatening. And for the first time she realized she wanted to be part of that rhythm, even if only for a while. Now and ever being ready, washing her face with cool water from the basin and combing her hair. Small actions like these felt comforting, grounding her in the present. She realized how long it had been since she had taken care of herself, since she had allowed herself any comfort. On her father's land, fear had consumed every moment, and her own needs had always come last. But here, in this cabin, she felt a strange new freedom. She could exist without constantly worrying about anger or punishment. The rancher appeared in the doorway, carrying a small basket of food. "Good morning," he said, smiling warmly. "I made some breakfast. You should eat before we start the day." She nodded, grateful, and joined him at the small wooden table. As she ate, she noticed how his presence was steady but not imposing. He didn't rush her, Didn't ask intrusive questions, didn't expect her to reveal anything she wasn't ready to share. He simply offered kindness, and that kindness began to feel like a lifeline. After breakfast, he suggested she help with small chores around the ranch. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to move or work, and fear still lingered in her chest, but he encouraged her gently, showing patience and understanding. "You can start small," he said. "Just helping with the animals or carrying water. Take your time." His calm tone reassured her, and she nodded, feeling a spark of courage she hadn't known she possessed. As she worked alongside him, she began to notice small lessons in his actions. He treated every animal with care, spoke softly to them, and moved deliberately to avoid startling them. She began to mimic his movements, learning how to handle the animals, how to carry out chores efficiently, and how to respect the rhythm of the land. Every small task completed successfully gave her confidence, but she realized that she was capable, that she could learn and adapt, and that fear did not define her. During the afternoons, they would sit on the porch drinking water or a cup of tea and watch the sun slowly dip toward the horizon. These moments of quiet became her favorite part of the day. She began to talk in small ways, sharing fragments of her past, memories of the life she had left behind. She spoke carefully, cautious of judgment, but the rancher listened with patience and understanding, never interrupting, never dismissing her feelings. He offered words of encouragement when needed and allowed her silence when that was all she could manage. Trust grew slowly. At first she was wary of his intentions, fearful that kindness might be a trick or that he might abandon her once she showed vulnerability. But day by day his consistency proved otherwise. He offered safety without strings attached. He treated her with respect, never expecting her to act differently than she felt. This steadiness was unfamiliar but deeply comforting. She began to realize that people could care without demanding, that kindness could exist without condition. As days turned into weeks, she noticed changes within herself. She moved with more confidence, spoke with more clarity, and began to see herself not just as someone who had been afraid, but as someone who could make decisions, solve problems, and face challenges. The forest, once overwhelming and frightening, became a place she could navigate with skill and observation. She learned to find water, identify safe plants, and recognize signs of animals nearby. Every lesson learned strengthened her, not just physically, but emotionally. There were moments of difficulty. Sometimes memories of her father's anger would surge unexpectedly, and fear would grip her chest as if she were back on that land. At first, these moments overwhelmed her, and she would retreat into silence, curling up in a chair or walking alone in the fields. But the rancher never pressed. He simply gave her space, staying nearby but allowing her to process her emotions at her own pace. Over time, she learned to face these feelings, acknowledging them without letting them control her. She began to understand that healing was not linear. It was full of ups and downs, and that was okay. He also encouraged her to find small joys. A new flower blooming by the fence, the soft sound of a calf calling to its mother, the warmth of sunlight on her face. He taught her to notice these moments and let them lift her spirits. She realized that happiness could exist even after hardship, that life could offer beauty and comfort if she allowed herself to see it. Slowly, the walls around her heart began to soften, and the weight of her past felt lighter. They spent long afternoons repairing fences, feeding animals, and maintaining the ranch. Through shared work, a bond formed between them. She began to feel a sense of belonging that she had never known. For the first time in her life, she felt that she could be part of something, that her efforts mattered, and that she had a place where she was valued. The rancher never demanded affection, never rushed her feelings, but the quiet moments of shared work and presence slowly wove a sense of trust and connection between them. Evenings became a time for reflection. She would sit by the fire, writing in her small notebook, recording her thoughts, dreams, and the small victories of the day. Began to see her journey not just as an escape from fear, but as a process of discovering strength within herself. Each day of survival, each small task completed, each moment of trust and kindness reminded her that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She also noticed subtle changes in the rancher. His patience, his gentleness, and his steady presence were constant, yet she saw glimpses of a caring nature that extended beyond work and survival. He laughed at small things, shared stories of the land, and treated every living being with respect. She began to understand that kindness could be a strength, not a weakness, and that strength could exist without harshness or fear. Over time, she felt a sense of safety that she had never known. She could leave her bag open, sleep without checking every corner, and step outside without trembling. The fear that had once controlled her life began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of confidence and self-reliance. She realized that healing was not just about escaping the past, it was about learning to live fully in the present and embracing the possibility of a future she could shape for herself. The bond between her and the rancher deepened. It was built on trust, mutual respect, and the simple knowledge that each could rely on the other. She didn't have to speak constantly or explain everything about herself. His presence alone was enough to remind her that safety and care could exist in the world. Slowly, she allowed herself to lean on him in small ways, asking questions, seeking guidance, and sharing thoughts she had long kept hidden. Her life on the ranch became a balance of work, learning, and quiet reflection. She began to anticipate the rhythm of the day: morning chores, afternoons tending to animals or the land, evenings by the fire, nights of rest. Within this rhythm, she found stability, a sense of order that contrasted sharply with the chaos of her past. And within this stability, she began to feel a deep, quiet confidence growing inside her. She also began to dream again, not just of survival, not just of escaping fear, but of a life where she could have joy, purpose, and freedom. She imagined waking each day without dread, working with strength and skill, forming friendships and connections, and contributing to something meaningful. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe that such a life was possible and that she deserved it. Night after night, she fell asleep feeling safer, stronger, and more certain of herself. She had survived alone in the wilderness, faced fear and uncertainty, and discovered resilience she had never known she possessed. But she had also found something unexpected, a human connection that offered trust, care, and the quiet promise of protection. It was not a cure for all her past pain, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, she realized, held the power to shape the rest of her life. The mornings on the ranch had begun to feel familiar, almost comforting. She would wake to the gentle sound of birdsong, the sun casting golden light across the fields, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. For the first time in her life, she did not wake in fear. She stretched her arms and legs, feeling strength she hadn't known she had, and took a deep breath of the clean, open air. The cabin, the animals, the land, and the rancher's quiet presence had become her new normal, a world built on safety, care, and trust. She moved through the day with purpose. Breakfast was followed by small chores, feeding the animals, filling water troughs, gathering firewood. Each task, once daunting, had become a rhythm she could rely on. She noticed the subtle signs of the ranch, the patterns of animal behavior, the way the sun moved across the fields, and how weather could change everything. In learning these details, she discovered that life was not just about survival, it was about understanding, adapting, and contributing. She felt proud of the small but meaningful role she played in this world. The rancher observed her silently, occasionally offering guidance or encouragement. He never rushed her, never criticized her mistakes, and celebrated her small victories with a quiet acknowledgement that spoke louder than words. She realized how unusual this was. Someone who treated her as capable, who allowed her to grow at her own pace, who offered trust instead of control. It was a stark contrast to her life before, a life where fear had been constant and support had been conditional. Slowly, she began to believe that not all people sought to dominate or control. Some simply cared. One afternoon, while repairing a fence near the edge of the property, she paused to look out at the open fields. The horizon stretched endlessly, painted with soft greens and golden sunlight. She could feel the wind on her face, hear the distant call of a bird, and smell the fresh grass. For the first time in years, she felt a deep sense of freedom, a sense that the world was hers to explore, hers to inhabit, and hers to shape. She realized that she had not only escaped her father's land, but had also found a place where she could thrive. As days turned into weeks, she began to discover new parts of herself. She laughed more freely, finding joy in small things: a playful calf chasing its mother, the smell of fresh bread baking, the warmth of sunlight on her hands. She began to speak with confidence, sharing her thoughts and ideas with the rancher, offering opinions about tasks or plans for the day. Each word spoken without fear, each decision made without hesitation, reinforced her growing sense of independence. She realized that she was not just surviving, she was living. The bond between her and the rancher deepened, naturally. It was built on mutual respect, shared work, and quiet moments of understanding. She felt safe enough to reveal pieces of her past, recounting memories of her father, her childhood on the land, and the fears that had haunted her for years. He listened without judgment, acknowledging her pain and validating her feelings. Through this process, she learned that being heard, being understood, and being accepted could be healing in itself. She no longer felt that she had to carry her burdens alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of pink and orange, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The rancher joined her, and they watched the fields together in silence. There was no need for conversation. The quiet was comforting, filled with unspoken trust and connection. She realized that this sense of calm, this simple presence of another human being who genuinely cared, was something she had longed for more than she had realized. It was not just safety she had found, it was belonging. She began to dream of a future that had once seemed impossible. She imagined waking each day with purpose, working with skill and confidence, and being part of a community that valued her. She imagined a life where fear did not dominate her every action, where she could make decisions freely, and where she could find joy in ordinary moments. These dreams no longer felt like distant fantasies. They felt achievable, tangible, and real. She knew she had come a long way from the frightened girl who had fled her father's land. As she continued to grow, she also learned the importance of patience and resilience. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were days when tasks seemed overwhelming, when setbacks occurred, or when memories of her past resurfaced unexpectedly. But she faced these challenges with a newfound strength. She had survived fear, uncertainty, and isolation, and she now understood that difficulties could be met with courage, planning, and determination. Every challenge she overcame reinforced her sense of self and her belief in her own abilities. The rancher remained a steady presence through all of this, offering guidance, encouragement, and quiet companionship. He never demanded affection or trust. He allowed it to grow naturally, showing through actions rather than words that he cared. She realized that trust was not given instantly. It was built slowly, through consistent kindness and reliability. And through this process, she discovered that she could trust herself as well. She could trust her instincts, her decisions, and her ability to face the world with strength and courage. Weeks turned into months, and she began to feel fully integrated into the rhythm of life on the ranch. She moved with confidence, spoke with clarity, and approached each day with purpose. She found satisfaction in completing tasks, helping animals, and contributing to the care of the land. She noticed the beauty in simple routines, the rising sun, the gentle breeze, the sound of water in the troughs, and the laughter of small victories. Each moment reinforced the sense that she was part of something larger than herself, that her life had meaning and value. She also discovered a sense of emotional resilience she had never known. Memories of her father and the fear that had dominated her early life still surfaced occasionally, but they no longer controlled her. She could acknowledge them, process them, and then let them pass without allowing them to define her. She realized that healing was not about forgetting the past. It was about learning to live fully despite it, finding strength in the face of adversity and embracing the possibilities of the present. Her connection with the rancher became a source of deep comfort and stability. She learned that relationships could be built on trust, respect, and shared purpose, without fear or obligation. She felt free to be herself, to make mistakes, to ask questions, and to seek guidance. In his presence, she discovered that care and protection could coexist with independence and personal growth. She realized that she did not have to sacrifice herself to feel safe. She could be strong, capable, and cared for all at once. One morning, as they worked together in the fields, she paused to look out over the horizon. The sun had just risen, casting long shadows and painting the sky with soft light. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey she had undertaken, for the courage it had taken to leave her father's land, and for the unexpected kindness that had met her along the way. She realized that her life had changed profoundly, not just in circumstance, but in spirit. She had transformed from a frightened, trembling girl into a confident, resilient young woman. She thought about the future with hope and excitement. There were still challenges ahead, still moments of uncertainty, but she knew she could face them. She had discovered her own strength, the power of trust, and the beauty of a life built on kindness and respect. She had found a place where she belonged, where she was valued, and where she could continue to grow. For the first time, the idea of a future filled with possibility felt real, not frightening. As the day ended and the sky darkened, she sat by the cabin, feeling the warmth of the fire and the steady presence of the rancher nearby. She realized that she was no longer alone, no longer defined by fear, and no longer constrained by the past. She had found safety, trust, and a sense of home, a home not defined by walls or land, but by care, connection, and mutual respect. She felt a quiet, enduring peace settle over her, knowing that she could face whatever came next with courage and confidence. In that moment, she understood the true meaning of her journey. It had not been just about escape. It had been about discovering herself, reclaiming her strength, and learning that life could be lived fully, freely, and with hope. She had survived fear, embraced trust, and built a life she had once thought impossible. And as she looked out over the fields, feeling the cool evening air and the quiet presence of someone who truly cared, she knew that her story was only beginning, and that she had the power to shape it however she chose. The days that followed continued this new rhythm. She rose with the sun, worked with skill and confidence, and ended each day with a sense of accomplishment. She laughed, learned, and connected, finding joy in moments both big and small. She nurtured the land, tended to the animals, and cared for herself, and with each passing day she grew more certain that she had found not only safety and trust, but also a life worth living, a life she had built with her own courage and determination. She had fled her father's land, shaking with fear, but now she stood strong, confident, and free, and though the past would always be a part of her, it no longer held power over her. She had discovered that life could offer safety, care, and hope, and that she had the strength to embrace it. In the quiet fields of the ranch she had found herself, and with that discovery she had found a future filled with possibility.